Well, amazing grace and how great thou art. Two of the greatest worship songs of all time. And today we got to raise our voices in praise to God with both of those songs. How awesome is that? Many thanks to our worship team for leading us in worship every Sunday. They do a fantastic job. As mentioned, we're beginning a new series today on the prophet Jonah. And if you remember, we're going through the minor prophets this year. And when I say minor prophets, that doesn't mean they're minor in importance, all right? It just means they're shorter in length than some of the other prophets in the Bible. Jonah is one of 12 minor prophets, and within each there is a major message. For Jonah, it's really about what we sung about. It's about God's amazing grace, which is one of the reasons why God is so great. His love and mercy are relentless. And we see this again and again in Jonah. So let's turn to the book of Jonah together. I want to get right to the text. I'm going to kind of walk through the first chapter and then try to unpack its message. If you do not have a hard copy of the Bible, there should be one close by on the chair rack in front of you. That's our church's gift to you today if you need a Bible. As you're finding Jonah, it can be a little hard to find, right? So as you're finding Jonah, I want to take a moment to celebrate Love Week. Together, by God's grace, we completed 46 total projects. That's 14 more than last year. So $4,600 will be divided evenly and given to 5 local nonprofits: the Pregnancy Care Center of Wayne County, Christian Children's Home of Ohio, Orrville Area Boys and Girls Club, O Huddle, and Love Inc. And so I just want to thank all of you who participated. And let's remember prioritizing others, okay? Especially people far from God, is something we need to be doing year-round. And so let me encourage you to follow up with those that you served, or think of other ways that you can serve as we seek to impact every corner of our community. Before we jump into Jonah 1, it's worth asking ourselves why we do things like Love Week in the first place. As followers of Jesus, we're meant to step out, to serve, right? And sometimes to go toward people and places that are outside our comfort zone. And that ties right in with the way Jonah's story begins, all right? And so let's start at Jonah chapter 1, verse 1. Here we go. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. Now, one thing to note right away is the word great in verse 2. That word shows up 7 times in this chapter alone, and it's not a coincidence. Each time, it points us to God's greatness and His power that's woven throughout this story. I'm going to highlight all 7 occurrences as we go because they're actually not all translated the same way, all right? Verse 3, but Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. That's kind of hard for me to pronounce. Can you say that with me on the count of 3? 1, 2, 3. Tarshish. All right, thank you. He went down to Joppa. Another key word here is down. Jonah is literally and spiritually going down as he runs from God. It's a downward spiral. Verse 4, then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent or great storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. Here are the second and third times that this word great appears, describing the storm. The sailors are terrified and praying to their own gods, throwing cargo overboard to lighten the ship. But Jonah, he's down below deck asleep. The captain wakes him up and says, verse 6, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish." Can you believe that? The sailors are freaking out and praying to their gods, but Jonah's below deck catching some serious Z's, okay? Verse 7, "Then the sailors said, 'Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity.' And the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, 'Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?' He answered, 'I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land.' Well, this terrified them, great fear. And they asked, 'What have you done? What have you done?'" Notice the fear here on the part of the sailors. It's a great fear, a deep respect and terror for God's power, even more than Jonah seems to have. Verse 11, it says the sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked, wait, I'm really behind here on my slides. I'm sorry. Here we go. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this" what? "Great storm has come upon you." Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. So they're trying to spare Jonah's life. Then they cried out to the Lord, "Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you please." They recognized God's ultimate authority. Then they took Jonah and they threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men, what? Greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. See, the response here of the sailors is significant. They fear God more than Jonah, and they worship him. God's power and mercy touch even the pagan sailors. Finally, verse 17, "Now the Lord provided a huge or great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights." The final great here in chapter 1 describes the fish, God's provision and rescue in Jonah's darkest place. So let's unpack this by looking at 4 lessons. They're there on your outline if you want to follow along, maybe even fill in some of the blanks there. Number 1 is that God's call isn't optional. He sends us out for a reason. See, God didn't just ask Jonah to do something small or safe. He sent him to Nineveh. And this is something we need to understand. Nineveh was a city that, to put it mildly, was the last place any Israelite would want to go. An Israelite like Jonah. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and the Assyrians were the worst and most hated enemy of Israel and the rest of the world. And this was for good reason. The Assyrians were legendary for their cruelty. Okay, I want to quote from one of the commentaries I have on the book of Jonah. Listen to this. The Assyrians, they were known to impale their enemies on stakes in front of their towns and hang their heads from trees in the king's gardens. They also tortured their captives by hacking off noses, ears, or fingers, gouging out their eyes, or tearing off their lips and hands. They reportedly covered the city walls with the skins of their victims. Rebellious subjects would be massacred by the hundreds, sometimes burned at the stake. Then their skulls would be placed in great piles by the roadside as a warning to others. Jonah decided that he would rather quit than preach to such people. I mean, can you blame him? Can you blame him? God is telling Jonah, go to the very heart of evil, to a place that everyone fears, and speak my words. Wow. Now, knowing that, I'm a lot more sympathetic toward Jonah's response, aren't you? I'm a lot more sympathetic. God's call to him wasn't just uncomfortable, it was terrifying. If Jonah goes to Nineveh and preaches against it, as verse 1 says, he's not just facing awkward conversations, he's actually risking his life. But still, God's call is not optional. He sends Jonah out for a reason. And the reason is God cares about the people we'd rather write off. Even people who seem way far too gone. You see, like Jonah, God calls us to love. He calls us to serve. He calls us to reach out to the last, least, and lost. People in places that we'd rather avoid. Because God's heart is always about reaching those farthest from Him. That's where Jonah's story starts. It starts with a call that's hard to hear and even harder to obey. But here's the second lesson we need to see, and that's this. You can't outrun God. He's already where you're headed. Jonah hears God's call. And what does he do? He bolts in the opposite direction. All right? Tarshish wasn't just a random place. If you look at a map, and I don't know if you can see this very well, but basically Tarshish, okay, it's over here. It's basically the furthest west that you could go at that time in the known world. And it's in the opposite direction of Nineveh, which is over here. Okay? From where Jonah is to Nineveh is about 500 miles, and from here to Tarshish is about 2,000 miles. Okay? But notice in the text, Jonah isn't just running away from Nineveh. The text says he's running away from the presence of the Lord. Now, in one sense, that's impossible, right? Psalm 139 says, "Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there." In other words, you cannot escape God's presence. He's everywhere, right? But still, every step Jonah took was a step away from God's presence, in the sense that he was spiraling further and further from where he was meant to be. But here's the thing. While Jonah is running, God is already there. God doesn't lose track of Jonah. God's purpose isn't thrown off by Jonah's disobedience, and his purpose isn't thrown off by yours either, okay? You see, you can run, you can hide, you can try to fill your life with distractions or busyness or even good things, but you can't outrun God. He is already where you're headed. And maybe you've been there. Or maybe you're there right now, feeling like you're running, or you're hiding, or you're drifting. The good news is, God doesn't give up when we run. He keeps pursuing, not to punish us, but to bring us back. And that's exactly what happens next in Jonah's story. God steps in and things get intense, which leads to lesson number 3 there. Write this down. Sometimes the storm is the wake-up call you need. See, God sends a storm, not because he's strict or malicious, but because he loves Jonah too much to let him keep running. The storm is about getting Jonah's attention, shaking him awake, right? Literally and spiritually, and saying, hey, you're going the wrong way. And you know, sometimes it takes a storm, doesn't it? Sometimes it takes a storm, something we never wanted, something that disrupts our plans, to wake us up to what really matters. And here's what is sobering. Storms don't just affect us. Notice in the text that Jonah's running puts everyone on the ship in danger. And sometimes when we run from God or ignore his voice, the fallout spills over into other people's lives. Our families, our friends, even strangers. But even in the middle of the storm, God's mercy is at work. He's not trying to destroy Jonah, he's trying to bring him back. And so maybe you're facing a storm in your life right now, and it feels overwhelming or even unfair. But could it be, consider this, could it be that God is using it to get your attention, to call you back, to maybe wake you up to something that you've been missing? Well, that brings us to the final lesson, and that is God's ultimate purpose is salvation and rescue. Even when Jonah hits rock bottom, he's literally sinking to the bottom of the sea, God doesn't abandon him. Instead, what does God do? He provides a great fish. You see that? See, God's mercy shows up. And it shows up in the most unexpected way. You see, Jonah's story could have ended with him drowning in regret and in the consequences of his own disobedience. But instead, God steps in and saves him. And don't miss this. God's rescue doesn't just stop with Jonah. The sailors. Do you notice when we read that? The sailors who started out terrified and praying to all of their gods, they end up worshiping Jonah's God. The one true God, maker of heaven and earth. Man, this is what God does. He saves, he rescues, he redeems. His goal isn't to ruin us. His goal is to bring us back, to restore us. So if you're feeling like you've run too far this morning, or maybe you're feeling like you've messed up too badly, or the storm is just too much, remember, God's end game is always rescue. What's the song? Ain't no mountain high enough. Ain't no valley low enough. Ain't no river wide enough. Do you know it? Well, let me tell you, there ain't no ocean deep enough or sin big enough that can keep you from God getting to you, baby. Okay? All right? Just kind of rewrite that a little bit. There ain't no ocean deep enough or sin big enough that can keep God from getting to you. And that's where this story ultimately points us. Okay? Not just to Jonah, but it actually points us to Jesus. The one who came all the way down to this earth so that we could be brought all the way back to God. That's Jonah 1 in a nutshell. Jonah tried to run, but no matter where he went, God was already there. Even in the storm, even at the bottom of the sea, God's presence and mercy are relentless. And again, it all points to Jesus. Jonah was thrown into the sea because of his own sin. But centuries later, the sinless Son of God willingly stepped into the storm for us. See, Jonah ran, Jesus obeyed. Where Jonah's rebellion brought trouble to others, Jesus took our rebellion upon himself, dying and rising again to rescue anyone who will call upon his name. You see, you can run, but you can never outrun God's love. Jesus is living proof. See, he's already gone to great lengths to bring you back with him. And that's the amazing grace that we sung about earlier and that we continue to sing about. The grace that saves. The grace that restores and carries us when we cannot carry ourselves. It's the same grace that inspires us to say, "How great thou art." As we stand in awe of God's power and love that never lets us go. So here's the takeaway. Wherever you are, all right, whether you're running, drifting, or maybe you're just feeling lost, okay? God is calling you back. The question is, will you listen? Will you trust him enough to say yes? Even when it's scary. Will you let him rescue you right where you are? This week I want to challenge you to step out, maybe even literally, so that God can step in. Sometime in the next week, take a 30-minute walk or drive to listen to God. Can you do that? No distractions, just power off that phone for 30 minutes. Just you and God. And just come before him, maybe with Jonah 1 open before you, and ask yourself these questions. Ask God these questions. What do you, God, want to show me today? Is there something I'm running from? And what's your next step for me? And please trust that wherever you go, Jesus is already there. And he's waiting to lead you forward. Let's pray together. Father, I want to thank you for pursuing us with your love. And some of us today maybe feel like Jonah, afraid, running, or maybe unsure what's next. Especially think of our graduates stepping into new things. Father, I pray that you would give them courage and peace and a knowledge that you're already ahead guiding the way. Father, I thank you for Jesus, who went all the way into the depths to rescue us and to give us new life. If anyone here is ready to stop running and start following Jesus, Father, I pray that you would give them boldness to say yes today, right now. With open hearts, we say, God, I'm ready. I want to follow Jesus. I trust you. Lead me forward. And God, I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, if that's you today, if you're ready to take your next step toward Jesus and to say yes to him, man, we'd love to talk with you, pray with you, help you take your next step. As the worship team leads us in a song of response, I'm going to be up front here. I'd love to talk with you, pray with you. Man, don't leave today without saying yes to Jesus, because he's here waiting for you.